Welcome in, everyone. This is Sean with MTG808 Jr., and today we're going to be taking a look at a Red White Aggro list that was played in our most recent Standard Pauper tournament. But before we jump into that list, just want to make sure that everyone knows about our awesome Youth Championship Scholarship Tournament happening this May. We've got $750 or more in scholarship prizes for the top finishers at our tournament. So if you are enrolled in K through 12 school and you love playing Magic, now is the perfect time to pick up Standard Pauper and come play in one of our youth Standard Pauper tournaments to get ready for this May's tournament here on Oahu. So make sure you check that out, and we're going to jump into some Standard Pauper content here. So we only had 3 players come to our most recent Standard Pauper tournament, but Jack here, who's a student at Nanakuli High and Intermediate School, he played a Red White Aggro deck. Unfortunately, he went 0-2, coming in 3rd place, right? Hence the shrug of, I guess so, in this picture. But Jack is a good sport, and he took his lickings and wanted to learn how to do better, right? He has been playing in our tournaments for a while, and once we announced our scholarship tournament, he decided to become more of a competitive player, whereas he kind of stuck to the more casual formats. He liked playing for fun. He liked playing EDH, which is a very casual format. But once we announced our scholarship tournament, he is like, well, now I'm going to try to win. So he brewed up this Red White Aggro list, and, there's some improvements that can be made with this list. We're going to have a link to this list in the description. But for now, we're going to jump on over. Oh, not this one. This one. All right, we're going to jump on over to Magic Online to take a look at Jack's list. So the first thing that I would point out is that this is a 60 card deck, and Jack is only playing 16 lands. He had played in the F&M draft at Westside Comics 2 days before this tournament, and he's a very good limited player. He holds his own with the adults in limited, but he figured, well, I'm only playing 16 lands in my 40 card deck, can probably play 16 lands in my 60 card deck, and that logic just doesn't hold up. The least number of lands that I would recommend you can play or get away with playing in a 60 card format is about 19 or 20. I think we did a deck tech on one deck that had 18 lands, but it was a very aggressive deck, had a very low curve, and it was playing 4 Renegade Map, which is a 1-mana artifact that can search for a land. So it was essentially playing 22 lands. So 16 lands is just nowhere near enough. Poor Jack ended up not playing his second land in either of his games against Aiden. And I think he was mono screwed when he played against Naia as well. So, that was one of the first changes we did. I'm talking about Jack kind of getting beaten up with this deck, but as I said, he took his lickings in good spirit and was very, very open to feedback on how to make the deck better. So, I'm not going to go into too much depth looking at his list. I am going to talk about a few points, but we're going to spend a lot of time looking at the updated list that I help him come to after he finished the tournament. So basically, this list is a pile of creatures. Granted, he picked out, some of the better creatures in the format, right? Like Gustwalker is probably the best white 2-drop. Sacred Cat is a very good white 1-drop, right? He's got, the 2-mana 3/1s that are very aggressive. Hammer Skull is very aggressive, so is the Scrapper, right? But he's got a whole bunch of extra creatures in here as well, right? All of these creatures, except maybe this one, could see play in their own given deck, but you don't want this many creatures. He's playing 36 creatures and only 16 lands and only 8 other spells, right? So one of the lessons that I was trying to help Jack understand is that you don't want to just play creatures. You want to make sure that you have spells to help support those creatures, right? So that when you play a creature, you're going to have spells to help make sure it does its job. So he's got the 4 cartouches in here, right? And then the 4 Inspiring Roars. This card is legal in Standard Pauper because it was printed in the a Johnny Planeswalker deck as a common. So if you haven't seen this card before, don't worry. It's not that common. You don't see it very often unless you bought the Ajani deck, but it is legal in Standard Pauper. But, you know, besides these spells, he doesn't have any way to help his creatures kind of push through. So even if he were to draw the right amount of lands that he needs, it's unlikely that his creatures are going to get the job done against another deck. So, you know, he selected good creatures, but we want to make sure we have spells to help support it. So, taking a look over here, this is the list that we came to after I kind of helped him streamline the deck a little bit, talked to him on, you know, this kind of strategy that he wanted to play, showed him some options, and this is what we came to together. But we're going to switch over here to Moto to take a look at it. Alright, so this is the list after we streamlined it a little bit. As you can see, we have 20 lands, 11 plains because we have mostly white spells, and 9 mountains to help cast you know, the few red cards that we have. Some of the creatures that we kept Gustwalker, right? Very good card. We kept Oketra's Avenger, right? He had 3, but we're playing 4 here. We kept Territorial Scrapper and Kenra, or Territorial Hammerskull and Kenra Scrapper, right? Territorial Hammerskull, whenever it attacks, you get to tap a creature an opponent controls, so you kind of remove their blockers, keep them from being able to block. Kenra Scrapper has a Menace, and you can exert it to, you know, give it 4 power instead of 2 power. So his 3-drops are very good at pushing through damage. Gustwalker, I don't know if we've made a video on a Gustwalker deck before. So it's a 2-mana 2/2. You know, that's completely fine on its own. And when you attack, you can choose to exert it. If you do, it becomes a 3/3 flyer, but it won't untap during your next turn. So if your opponent has creatures that can block a 2/2, you just exert it. You attack for 3. You won't be able to attack with it on your next turn, but oh well, you still got to attack for 3, which is better than not attacking at all with your 2/2. Oketra's Avenger, similar thing. It also has exert. It's a 2-mana 3/1. 3/1s are very fragile, right? They die to servos, they die to 1-drops, they die to almost everything. But Oketra's Avenger says if you exert it, you'll prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to it this turn. So if your opponent has a creature that would trade with the Avenger and you don't want to trade with that creature, you can attack and exert it, and then if your opponent does block, then they lose their creature, you get to keep Oketra's Avenger, or if they don't block, then they take 3 damage. So the exert mechanic is very good at kind of pushing through damage. So, very aggressive creatures. Let's move down the curve a little bit here. We ended up with 2 Goblin Trailblazers and 2 Nefcrop Entanglers. I'm not sure which of these 2 creatures is better, so we ended up on a split. Nefcrop Entangler, 2-mana 2/1, very solid, and it has Trample, so you know it's a solid creature. You can exert it, and it becomes a 3/3 Trample, right? So similar to Gustwalker, 3/3 Trample is a little worse than a 3/3 Flyer, but you know, it's still going to be able to kind of help you push through damage. Trailblazer, on the other hand, has Menace, so if your opponent has 1 creature that's bigger than it, it's not going to do any good blocking Goblin Trailblazer because they need to have 2 creatures in order to block a creature with Menace. So Goblin Trailblazer, good at pushing damage through, so is Nefcrop Entangler. Continuing with the creatures, we kept Sacred Cat, right? It's a 1-mana 1/1 lifelink. You know, if you buff it up, then it becomes bigger and you gain more life, which is awesome. And if Sacred Cat dies, you can just pay 1 white and embalm it, which means you exile it from your graveyard, and you get a 1/1 token that is, you know, the same thing as Sacred Cat, except that it's a zombie cat instead of just a cat. So, and it's a token, so if it gets bounced or anything, it gets exiled. So Sacred Cat is kind of like a 2-for-1. You can play it once. If it dies, you can play it a second time, right? That's what we call card advantage. So it's a small body, but the deck has a bunch of ways to help make it a little bit bigger. So Sacred Cat is very solid. The last creature in the deck over here, we have Fanbearer. 1-mana 1/2, right? So decent sized body. It won't die to Skullduggery or other things that deal 1 damage. But the real reason we're playing Fanbearer is not because of how big it is, but because of this ability. You can pay 2 mana and tap Fanbearer to tap any target creature. So if your opponent has a nice big blocker in play, and you have a Fanbearer with 2 open mana, you can just tap that mana, tap the Fanbearer, and then all of a sudden their big giant blocker is not going to be able to block this turn. You can also do the same thing when your opponent, or on your opponent's turn, if they enter their combat step and they have a big giant creature that they want to hit you with. If you have 2 mana and Fanbearer untapped, you can just pay that 2 mana, tap the Fanbearer, tap their big giant creature. It can't attack you, and then you're going to get to untap and attack them while their big giant creature is still tapped. So Fanbearer, it's a little mana intensive, especially for a deck with only 20 lands, but it is going to be very good at helping you kind of close out games when you're being aggressive, or keep games going longer if you're kind of on your back foot and getting beaten down. So Fanbearer is a very solid card, one of the best 1-drops in the format. Excuse me. So those are the creatures. They're all very aggressive, right? We got some menace, we got some flying, right? We got some ability to tap down creatures. And here are the spells that are going to help us kind of push damage through. So probably well, let's start with Cartouche. So Jack was playing 2 Cartouche of Solidarity before. It's good enough. I told him you should just play the full 4. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has first strike, right? Make your creature a little bit bigger. First strike means that it can attack into creatures of similar size and win in combat, so helps you keep attacking. And when it comes into play, you get to make a 1/1 warrior with vigilance, right? So you get to add a little extra power to the board. So essentially, you're paying 1 mana for a +1/+1 and first strike on a creature and a 1/1 warrior. So for 1 mana, you're adding 2 power to the board, which is a great deal for an aggro deck. So Cartouche of Solidarity, very, very solid card. And Hone Kopesh. If you follow the channel at all, if you've been watching our deck techs, I can't speak highly enough of this card. I honestly think that Hone Kopesh is the best card in the standard Pauper format right now. It's just so versatile. It goes into so many decks. It might even belong in the blue-green Merfolk deck that we featured with Aiden's deck. We just recorded that video. But it wasn't in Aiden's deck, but it's here in this deck. For 1 mana, you play it to the board. It doesn't do anything until you pay a 2nd mana, and then the equipped creature gets +1/+1. But the real sweet thing about equipment is that even if the creature dies, the equipment stays in play. Unlike auras, right? If a creature with an aura dies, then the aura goes away. Even if the creature gets bounced to your hand by an unsummon or something like that, then the aura dies. But if you have an equipment, the equipment stays in play. You get to reuse it over and over again as long as you can pay the equip cost. Not only that, but also you can use the equipment on offense and defense, right? So if you want to attack with your Gustwalker, you can equip Hone Kopesh to your Gustwalker, maybe even exert it to make sure you get the damage through, right? And then after combat, you can pay another 1 to move it to a creature you want to block with. Maybe you want to block with Sacred Cap, make it a 2/2 lifelink, right? So Hone Kopesh is just very versatile, lets you always have options of how to use your mana. It's just an all-around great card. Helps you push damage through, helps you buff up blockers, the whole shebang. Hone Kopesh, can't speak highly enough of this card. If you're playing an aggro deck, you should probably consider playing this card in it. And then the last spells to kind of round out the deck, help push damage through. 2 shocks. This can, I've said it before, this card might also be the best card in the format. I think it's a notch below Hone Kopesh just because it's colored, whereas Hone Kopesh can go into any deck, Shock can only go into red decks. But for 1 mana, you get to deal 2 damage to target creature or player. You might kill a 1-drop, you might kill a 2-drop, you might even kill a 3-drop with Shock, right? That's a lot of tempo. Also, if your opponent is at 2, if you draw a Shock, you just kill them, right? Being able to deal damage to the face is a really, really important ability for an aggro deck. So Shock, very flexible, very versatile spell. It might be worth trying to find room for more Shocks. I'm not sure what we would cut. Maybe trim 1 or 2 2-drops, maybe trim some 3-drops, get more Shocks into the deck. Very, very good card. The last card that we've got here in the deck is 3 Lightning Strikes. This art of Lightning Strike is from Theros, so if the card does not look familiar, don't worry. The card was reprinted in Ixalan, and it was an uncommon in Ixalan, which usually is not legal in Standard Pauper, but because Lightning Strike was printed as a common in Theros and in another set, M15, it is legal in Standard Pauper because it's in Standard and it was printed as a common before. So Lightning Strike, 2 mana, deal 3 damage to target creature or player, right? For all the reasons that Shock is good, Lightning Strike is good. You don't get as much tempo, right? If you're spending 2 mana to kill a 2-drop, you're not gaining tempo, you're just you're at mana neutral. You spent 2 mana, they spent 2 mana. That's an even trade. Sometimes Lightning Strike is more likely to kill a 3-drop or a 4-drop, you know, or a creature that has equipment on it. But just being able to deal 3 damage to a player over 2 damage, right? We've all played those games where your opponent is at 1 life and you can't kill them, right? So the difference between a Shock and a Lightning Strike might be the difference between a win and a loss. So Lightning Strike, very flexible, very versatile card, great in an aggro deck, clears the way for your attackers when you need it to, goes to the face when you need it to, all around good guy. Alright, so that is the main deck. Aggressive creatures, spells that help push through your aggressive creatures, and then moving to the sideboard. As if you've been following the channel, you know how important Hone Khopesh is in this format, as well as Inventor's Goggles. Fragmentize is probably the best answer to those. So one of the best reasons to play white is because Fragmentize is such a strong sideboard card. 1 mana to kill Hone Khopesh, right? That's an even trade. If they've equipped it, then you're getting tempo from Fragmentize. Even more tempo from Inventor's Goggles, because Inventor's Goggles cost 2 to equip. So Fragmentize, it's not an instant, so you're not going to get surprise value off of killing their equipment, but it's just the cheapest way to kill it, which for a deck that wants to win on tempo, that's exactly what you want. So 4 Fragmentize for the decks with Hone Khopesh and Inventor's Goggles. 4 Compulsory Rest. These are really good against big creatures, right? This deck has some answers to big creatures, right? You can tap them down, right, with Territorial Hammerskull or Fanbearer. You might be able to fly over them. You might be able to menace your way past them if they only have 1 big creature and no other creatures. But just having a nice, clean answer to a big creature is really nice. So Compulsory Rest, you know, you don't usually want to let your opponent gain life, but being able to just be 2 mana, that creature can't attack or block. If you spend 2 mana to gain 2 life later, that's fine. They're kind of losing tempo if they do that. So Compulsory Rest, the upside is way better than the downside on this card. So 4 Compulsory Rest against big creatures. 4 Bishop Soldier. Jack had this in his sideboard in the first draft. He correctly recognized this card as being very good against other aggro decks, right? Especially if you're on the draw. If you know that your 2-drop is going to have to block their 2-drop, Bishop Soldier is very good. Or even if you don't want to block their 2-drop, if they attack you with their 2-drop and then you're able to attack them back with Bishop Soldier, you might just regain the life that they dealt. You might just regain the damage that they dealt you, or the life that you just lost. So Bishop Soldier is very good when you're racing. It might even belong in the main deck. As I mentioned before, I'm not too sure about this 2-drop slot. You know, I'm not sure which of these 2-drops is better. It might even be that Bishop Soldier is better. But I think Bishop Soldier for sure belongs in the sideboard, right? Especially for those matchups where, you know, tempo is going to matter a lot, right? It's going to be very back and forth and swingy. Putting Cartouche of Solidarity, making this a 3/3 lifelinker. You know, if you have Hone Khopesh and Cartouche, then it's a 4/4 first strike lifelinker, right? That's just huge. You can kind of do the same thing with Sacred Cat, but, you know, Bishop Soldier starts a little bit bigger. So, very solid creature. Destructive Tampering. This card, the first ability, Destroy Target Artifact, is paying 3 mana for that effect when Fragmentize is going to be able to kill most of the artifacts in the format. You're not siding this card in for the first ability. You are siding this card in for the second ability, though. 3 mana, creatures without flying can't block this turn. Very, very good at breaking up board stalls, right? If you know your opponent is going to be putting a bunch of creatures into play, combat math is going to be hard, you're just kind of like, you know, you might have to just rely on Hone Khopesh, or, you know, making trades, or just building up your your side of the board. If you are building up your side of the board, you draw this card. You can just pay 3 mana. Most of their team can't block. Just finish them off in one swing. So there's only 2 of this card in the sideboard because you don't really want to draw multiples of it. Ideally, you want to cast this card and then win. So drawing multiples is just going to be redundant. So we only have 2 in the sideboard, but I think that against the decks that it's good against is going to be very good. And then the last card on the sideboard is just a shock. I already spoke about how good shock is. Sometimes you're just going to want to be able to win on tempo. Shock is very good at that. Alright, so this is the deck that Jack walked away from the tournament with, right? He came in, didn't have much success with his first draft, but had an open mind, learned a lot, was asking for advice, and got a lot of feedback not only from me, but from the other people that were at the tournament, and walked away with, this looks like a very competitive deck. So congratulations to Jack for, coming in 3rd place at the tournament, but really just persevering, ending up with a very solid and competitive deck. So, if you like the content that we make here, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. The scholarship tournament that we are running is funded solely by Patreon donations, so please consider becoming a supporter. For as little as $1 a month, you can become a supporter. If you want your name on one of the plaques here at a local game store, you're going to need to donate $10 or more a month. But if you believe in our cause, can become a Patreon supporter, or just like our videos on YouTube. If you hit the subscribe button, you're going to help the channel grow. Share our videos with people that you think are interested in the standard Pauper format. And we will catch you later. Thanks for stopping by.